Use this mic. It's really exciting to be here. This is not my first time at SGx. I've actually been a young professional in this audience as well as come in with other speakers. And so it's always really fun to see all the young professionals who are interested in this. Today, not my slides, there we go. Okay, so I am representing Secure World Foundation. I'm the Director of Space Application Programs. We are primarily a policy organization, for those of you who aren't familiar with us. Our mission is to promote any kind of cooperative solution that is going to ensure that the space environment is secure, safe, peaceful, and usable in the long run. One of the things we like to say is that it's really important to think about the application of what we actually do from space. So exploration has benefits. Satellite and Earth observation has benefits on Earth. So when we talk about protecting the space environment, as fun as space is and exciting as it is to work in this field, we do it because there are benefits received on Earth, and we need to make sure that those benefits can continue and expand in ways that are appropriate and obviously sustainable. So, well, I'll come back to this. So when they asked me to do this panel on norms of behavior, I immediately said, well, what's one of the biggest projects that Secure World has right now? And that's our counter space research project. And I think this is an area where if you know a lot about it, you know a lot about it. But if you don't, it can be kind of like oh, wow, I didn't realize that was such a big deal, both in terms of what's actually happening on the technical side, but also in terms of what's happening internationally to try to protect the space environment from this particular problem. And so this slide gives you a little bit of background, but essentially the idea of counter space capabilities is any technology that can ensure the ability to use space for one's own purpose while denying an adversary. Typically, I want to go over a little bit of what this means, and then we'll talk about the norms aspect of it. There's also an increased focus on this. As more and more countries use space, whether it's in the military domain, the civil domain, or the commercial domain, this issue is becoming more and more important, and it's not something that we can leave to militaries anymore. There is an aspect of security that is completely divorced from what a military capability is, and we need to find that common space to have a conversation about how it affects civil space, commercial space, and other space operations, including even exploration activities. So this is a list. You don't have to read the whole thing. I'm mostly going to talk today about direct descent, but I do want to provide this information in terms of it's actually really distracting to say what is counter space capabilities. We tend to think of direct descent anti-satellite testing when you actually destroy a satellite and object with a direct descent attack. But it is important to note that our report, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and in general, this topic actually covers a lot of different possible activities. So co-orbital, when you have a satellite in orbit actually sort of attacking another satellite, directed energy, when you're using weapons with focused energy such as the laser, electronic warfare, cyber, and we include space situational awareness in this, not so much because it is any kind of an attack, but because knowledge about the space environment and human space and activities is part of what enables offense and defense counter space capabilities. So it's an important part of these considerations. So now I have some slides with some fun pictures so that we all get actually sense of what these things look like. So here you have direct descent. That's what we're going to spend most of our time talking about today. Here you have pictures of an older co-orbital satellite, obviously a little scary if you ask me. Directed energy, so we have a laser dazzler, we have potential directed energy site identified in, this one's in China. So we have a variety of different capabilities that fall under that. Electronic warfare. This includes a lot of the ground equipment that is sort of backing up that activity. Cyber, I think we've all been hearing a lot about this. These are some headlines to give you a sense of what's being talked about around the world. And as you can see, this again doesn't just affect national, military satellites. It's also affecting commercial capabilities around the world. And if anything, cyber is probably the most common actualized form of actual counter space capability. So it's much more common to engage in this type of activity than it is direct descent. Now that doesn't mean that it's equally damaging. They have different effects, but to say, this is what, different companies and governments are actually dealing with on a day-to-day basis is true. And then finally, space situational awareness. You have government directed. You also have a growing commercial industry trying to supplement and feed into that. We have activities in the US, we have activities throughout Europe and Asia that are contributing to our better understanding of the space. And space is kind of strange. Anyone can look up, so it's hard to hide things in space, but at the same time, you can't just actually look up and see things, right? And so actually understanding exactly what's happening in the environment is still a concern. We have so much better data than we used to. We're seeing this area grow in leaps and bounds. But that isn't to say we have a perfect understanding of the space environment by any means. And so it's really important to actually consider what countries and others are doing to actually understand their operating environment. So what Secure World actually does. So one of the things that my colleagues noticed about 5-6 years ago was that it was really hard to have a public discussion about counterspace capabilities. And it's not because everything that you needed to talk about was secret. It was because many of the experts got at least some of their information from classified sources, even though the vast majority of things that we wanted to talk about weren't unknown, right? It wasn't like only a few people knew about them. And so what our organization, along with a few others who also noticed this problem did, was we said, okay, we want to put together, what can we say publicly? What do we actually know from publicly verifiable sources so that we can have conversations about this shared domain in a way that doesn't require everyone to enter into a SCIF, because that's not practical. Many of the people affected by these things don't have those classifications and are never going to. So essentially, how can we have a public dialogue about these threats? So we put together this report. I will say we're about to publish the new one, so you can get this free online. Typically, I would hand out copies of it, but we're about to publish this year's update, so it's updated every single year. So if you're interested, let me know. Sign up on our website. This is something that we provide out there. There's no cost to this report. It's very long and very detailed now, so I might also recommend the executive summary. But the idea is that we have gone around and we said every country that we can find information on publicly, we're going to put in this report. We're going to provide an assessment of what the actual facts are as we know them. And to be honest, off the record, we've heard a lot that this is pretty accurate. There's things that are missing. Obviously, if it's not in a public source, we can't put it in here. But if it's out there, we've put it into this report so that we can all talk and say, okay, this is what we know, and this is what we need to have happen. Two of the biggest things that you'll notice if you actually read it is the significant R&D and testing of a wide range of destructive and non-destructive counterspace capabilities by multiple countries. So the obvious countries are involved, the United States, China, Russia, but a lot of other countries are developing capabilities in this area, which is perfectly fine as long as we understand that those actions need to happen in a sustainable way that isn't going to cause detrimental effects to our ability to use the space environment. And non-destructive capabilities, as I said, are actually the most common and active. This is a chart that you'll find in there. As I said, we're about to update it. This gives you a sense of what different countries are actually doing, what they've tested, what they haven't tested, what they're engaged in. There's a variety of different charts and summary things in the report if you actually want to take a look at, who's developing what. We rely a lot on published documents to give a sense of also what's being developed, particularly in the space situational awareness domain. That's something people tend to speak up a little bit more publicly. And then this is a history of anti-satellite testing. Now, to be clear, this is orbital anti-satellite testing, so it's not including certain things. But what I really want to point out here is how there was a huge spike in the 1960s and 70s. Then we had a lull, and then coming in the 2000s, and recently we've seen another increase. And that is actually what is concerning, and that is where we want to talk a little bit about how do we develop a norm of behavior, because I think everyone understands that, I'll come back to that one, that blowing up satellites in orbit, to use the non-technical term, creates debris. And that debris doesn't just affect those in that orbit, it affects everyone in nearby orbits, depends on how the test was conducted, depends on what level it was conducted at. But none of these are a good idea. None of the countries who did this was never a good idea. It was never a good idea when the United States did it, it was never a good idea when China did it, it was never a good idea when Russia did it, it was never a good idea when India did it. But we've done it. Now we need to say, okay, what do we do now moving forward? What are the other options? Because no one is saying countries shouldn't develop their military capabilities in a way that's appropriate. That's not what the point here is. The point is that if you're going to build these capabilities out, you need to test them and conduct them in ways that are not going to create a whole different set of problems for everyone else that isn't necessary, right? You can test, these weapons frankly are not particularly sophisticated, like they're not brand new technology as you can see from this chart. And so there are a lot of ways to show international security intent. There's ways to test them through modeling. There are a lot of alternatives. And what we really want to emphasize is that this idea of a direct descent A-site test that deliberately creates debris is detrimental to the entire environment and to everyone who is operating, and that we all need to move away from that as an acceptable thing to do. Again, you guys will have these slides later, so you don't have to read this whole thing, but this is kind of a state of where multilateral discussions stand. One thing that's really important is security discussions in the UN are fairly frozen. This hasn't been an area where we've had a lot of forward movement in certain in certain areas. And so what are the alternatives? What can we do? And norms of behavior play a really important role in that. One of the biggest exciting things that have happened in the last couple of years is the creation of the open-ended working group. It's been meeting in last year, it's meeting this year. They're actually discussing some of these space-specific security issues in a relatively comprehensive way. And their goal is to develop a set of recommendations on possible norms, rules, and principles of responsible behavior relating to space threats. That has definitely been a wonderful forum. Our group has provided copies of that counterspace report, working on regional workshops. This is a great driver to have international conversations about this, and that's something that's important to remember for norms. You want to talk about the outcomes, but you also want to talk about the process and the value that goes into having those discussions. I think sometimes we can get overshadowed by what we really want. Yes, ideally, having a binding treaty saying no one is going to test a direct ascent weapon is a great idea. That's not going to happen tomorrow. But that doesn't mean that we can't make appreciable, important steps forward to actually improve that situation. And so we're excited that this group is encouraging countries to think about supporting that. Now, so we want to focus on direct ascent. We think that's the most dangerous of these kind of counterspace capabilities. They've left thousands of pieces of debris in orbit. As we said, the U.S. and what was then the USSR conducted several destructive ASAT tests quite a few years ago, and since 2005, several other countries have as well. This is the summary of what the actual pieces of, again, all this is available online, so I'm not going to dwell on the data here. I just want to show you that that data is available, that we are able to track a lot of the debris that has been created by these tests, and that we know over time, how much is left, and it is a relatively large amount. We're going to skip that one because the Wi-Fi isn't working for the videos. Oh, come on. There we go. All right, so one thing that was really exciting, my slide is, there we go. So international support for a moratorium on destructive ASAT tests has been growing. It's not like people notice the trend, right? We were starting to see these again. It's a problem. And so in April 2022, the US led the way on putting in place a voluntary moratorium on destructive ASAT testing. Since then, a number of countries have also made unilateral declarations that they are not going to do that. In addition, this last December, I believe, more than, where's the number on this slide? It's on this one. It was something like 150 some countries joined a UN resolution saying, hey, in general, this is a good idea. Those are really positive steps towards creating an international norm of behavior that could then someday lead to a more binding treaty. So all of these things add up over time. And so this is an area where we're actually seeing really exciting movement on the international stage. This is something where something is happening, countries are stepping up. One question we sometimes get is, well, why, if a country isn't actually building these technologies, why does it matter if they say that we aren't going to test? And one of the things to think about there is that's how you create a norm of behavior. That's how you say just because you haven't done this doesn't mean you couldn't, and more importantly, that you want to show support that this is an unacceptable behavior. This creates an amount of risk that is detrimental to everyone, and we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. And so this was a very positive recent development. In conclusion, there are a lot of open challenges. There's a lot of things that we definitely need to be thinking about, whether it's verification, how we define space weapons. There's a lot of ongoing discussions. But what I wanted to really emphasize today, since this panel was focused on norms of behavior, is the importance of treating norms of behavior as an incredibly important tool in certain areas for addressing global problems. And I think this is one where you see it as a really good example of positive steps forward, as I said, in very, very recent terms. The last thing that I wanted to share with everyone is if space sustainability and these kinds of governance topics are of interest to you, we really believe in supporting a young professional audience and contribution to these questions. So we are having a summit for space sustainability. We were in London last year. This year is going to be in New York City. Our event is, first of all, not expensive to begin with, but we offer half off for students. So it's only, or in young professionals, it's only $125. And we have an online hybrid component. So if these things are of interest to you, I think this is a potentially really exciting opportunity to engage, to show up. We have lots of young professional networking opportunities. So I wanted to just let you all know about that event. And that's it for me.